So, a couple weeks ago, I made a video highlighting my top 10 favorite killer perks and swore I'd make another video about the perks I really enjoy on Survivor. I always planned on getting to it, but I wanted to make a few videos in between then and now for variety's sake. Either way, here we are. I promised it would happen, and I am delivering. However, I should probably make something clear before we jump headfirst into the deep end for this video. Survivor perks tend to be a bit weaker than killer perks, just because a single survivor is 1/4 of an entire team. This means if their perks were as strong for game progression as killer perks are for game delay, Dead by Daylight would be an entirely different beast. For example, imagine if survivors had their own version of Pop Goes the Weasel, where after they unhook a teammate or whatever, the next generator they touch is instantly progressed by 20% of its total progress. That would be incredibly stupid. In fact, we've seen what happens when survivors have things at their disposal which are objectively too strong. The older version of Decisive Strike basically allowed the survivors a full minute of immunity, and the killer just couldn't do anything about it other than slug the survivor out. However, if the killer did that, there was always the chance, and usually happened, that the survivor had Unbreakable, giving the killer basically no options other than to just go find someone else, as the survivor did whatever they wanted. It was stupid and took way too long to get nerfed. Luckily, these days, survivor perks are pretty well balanced and occasionally useful for what they bring to the table, some better than others obviously. Exhaustion perks will always be decently strong, but thanks to their long cooldown, never feel exactly unfair. Information perks are usually helpful, and of course, anti-tunnel perks can feel essential at times. However, I never have them when I need them. All survivor perks have their uses, and I'm surprised at just how varied my choices were for this list, and I'm sure there will be some choices in here that surprise you. Due to the simple nature of how most survivor perks work, I'll probably have much less to say about them than the killer perks, but I'll do my best to articulate why I prefer running them. You might remember, as was the case for the last list I made, these perk placements have nothing to do with their actual strength and are just based on the preference I have for using these perks over the many others. This list is designed around what I prefer to use in matches, and there's nothing else I had in mind when I made it. These are just the perks I like. That's it. Okay, that's the only requirement. Without further ado, let's start at number 10. Quick and Quiet is a perk that's been around forever, but one that's only received like 3 changes, one of which was a small cooldown buff as of this year. I think that alone goes to show just how not problematic and well designed it really is. Once every 15 seconds, performing a rushed action makes absolutely no noise to the killer. No, loud noise notification across the map. That's it. Yeah, it's hard to fumble a design that simple. However, it does a pretty good job at what it's supposed to. It's not particularly strong, as when in chase with a killer, they probably know where you are, even without a loud noise notification when you fast vault, either by footsteps, breathing, or grunts of pain if you're injured, assuming sounds are working the way they're supposed to. However, I love this perk because of how well it combines with other things. If you take this perk with like Head On, Lithe, Dance With Me, or any perk that becomes better with it, you can get a lot more value than you would without running it. Just a single moment of confusion as the killer tries to figure out where you went can extend chases a ton, and that's why I like it. It's kind of good on its own if very situational, but combines really well with a ton of other things without feeling unfair. That's where it really shines in my opinion. A good perk that props up whatever build you decide to run. Plus, it's just a useful perk to throw in a slot you don't already have a perk in. You can make some pretty clever plays with it, which definitely helps me enjoy more. Plus, it's only a 15-second cooldown, which means you have a lot of chances to make it work. That's why Quick and Quiet is number 10. Deja Vu has saved more solo queue matches for me than I can count. The perk highlights the 3 generators that are the closest together and gives a small but respectable 6% increase to the repair speed while working on those generators. While it is, like Quick and Quiet, simple, it can be so helpful in solo queue. A lot of the time, survivors just do generators without thinking about where they're positioned, which can lead to some really difficult circumstances where you end up in an hour-long game because the killer has 3 generators right next to each other. This perk directly counters that by letting you know right off rip what generators are the most susceptible to that playstyle. And then once you do that, you do another highlighted generator. It's simple, it's easy, it's a huge deterrent for some random solo queue bullshit to happen at the end of a match. While it only gives you a little bit of information, that little bit of information can make or break games. Try this perk out if you haven't, I promise, it's worth a slot. A lot of people dismiss windows of opportunity by saying things along the lines of, it only benefits new players, as experienced players will usually know where to run when a chase starts. And I say, that's a whole lot of hogwash if I've ever heard it. Well, yes, it's a sign of player experience teams, if they have a plan as to where to run when the killer comes, DBD's RNG and tile placement can make it really hard to plan ahead, especially if you're chased into an area that you haven't been to. Windows of Opportunity makes that so much easier by letting you see the auras of pallets, windows, and breakable walls within 32 meters. Again, it's so simple, but it helps a ton. It lets you know what pallets have already been broken by the killer, it shows you where the window of a tile or structure might be facing, it gives you a better idea of what tiles you can chain together, it covers a lot of ground in a really easy and simple way. I've heard people say this perk is brain dead because it lets you play on autopilot, which is a dumb take for many reasons. Just because you know where windows and pallets are doesn't mean you don't have to think while looping them, obviously. It also lets me know just how many pallets have been wasted by my team, which is very helpful. On top of that, it's also consistently helpful when it comes to making pallets and windows stand out from the rest of the map, which can be a huge benefit depending on if you get like an indoor map or a very bright, distracting one. Like Toba. I don't know, I have a lot of fun using it, and I think it sort of pays for itself, and yes, it is great for new players too. Borrow Time, one of my most consistently enjoyed perks. When unhooking a teammate, this perk gives them an additional 10 seconds of endurance, as well as giving them another additional 10 seconds of haste. While there are certainly better anti-tunnel perks than Borrow Time, a lot of them end up being on the unhooked survivor's end, like Off the Record or Decisive Strike. With Borrow Time, I can be the person giving them an anti-tunnel perk, which is pretty helpful. The best part is it activates on every single unhook, which means it's consistently useful throughout the entire match. You'd be surprised at just how often faster movement speed and longer endurance prevents tunneling, or at least extends chases long enough for you or your teammates to get a bit more done. It won't prevent tunneling entirely, but it can make it much harder for the killer to force someone out of the game, assuming you're the one doing the unhooking. It's a pretty useful perk that I find really helpful most of the time. Most of the borrowed time. Alert is so useful, man. I can't prop this perk up enough. Whenever the killer breaks a pallet, wall, or generator, you get to see their aura for 5 seconds, no matter where they are on the map. Again, simple, but useful. I'm noticing a trend here. This perk comes in handy during a lot of different circumstances. For example, if the killer is chasing someone and they kick a pallet, you know exactly where the chase is happening, and if the chase is heading your direction. On the other end, if the killer is chasing you, you know when they're actually kicking the pallet and don't have to worry about them faking it out thanks to the very audible sound cue when the perk activates. If you're on a map with breakable walls, sometimes you get to know what killer you're facing before you even see them, which can be really useful depending on who they are. This perk is just generally helpful in a lot of ways, and it's no surprise to me that a good amount of people choose to use it over many other perks in the game. It just rocks. You know how I was glazing Borrowed Time before? Well, Babysitter is what I like about Borrowed Time, but upgraded. Instead of doing what Borrowed Time does though, it gives the survivor you unhooked 30 seconds of 10% haste, as well as preventing them from leaving scratch marks and pools of blood. That's pretty huge. This perk is a nightmare for any killer that wants to tunnel, which instantly makes me like it more than most perks. Again, it's the effect of Borrowed Time, where it's an anti-tunnel that you get to give to the other survivors. You think chasing a survivor with made for this is annoying? Well, this perk is that tenfold, but only works on the unhooked survivor. I love how great it is as a deterrent for killers that try to force out a survivor early, as that can be really annoying to go against, especially when the survivor being tunneled isn't able to extend the chase for very long. The use you get out of it really depends on the killer, but I find it more useful than not. The only reason it's not higher is because it's pretty situational like Borrowed Time, but I really like it regardless. In a similar vein to the anti-tunnel perks I mentioned previously, Will Make It does a good job at deterring some boring gameplay, but in an entirely different way. Will Make It increases the speed at which you heal survivors by 100% and lasts for a whopping 90 seconds after unhooking a survivor. The standard gameplay with this perk is unhooking a survivor and healing them very quickly. It doesn't work against killers who are camping, but it does a really good job at getting previously hooked survivors back in the game quicker, without needing to spend a lot of time healing. It also does wonders against perks like Leverage and Sloppy Butcher, and pretty much anything that gives survivors the mangled status effect. It also makes the killer less likely to target the guy that was just unhooked, as they're much less of a juicy target when they're fully healthy. It can also be super useful at some other points, given that it lasts for a whole 90 seconds. It's just one of those altruistic perks that feel really nice to use, and really nice to have used on you. That's why it takes the 4th slot. Oh, Dead Hard, what a complicated history you have. Fun fact, Dead Hard used to be my least favorite perk to face when playing killer, thanks to the whole press E for distance thing. But now, I love it. It's been reworked to sort of be the Dead by Daylight version of parrying, where pressing the button gives you the endurance effect for half a second. And if the killer hits you during that half a second, you get a burst of speed and go into deep wound instead of going down. It's a strong but skillful perk to use and no longer has the mindless dead hard for distance problem. If you're good, you get rewarded, and if you've seen some of my other videos, you know I'm a big fan of that when it comes to anything. My only real problem with it is that it can be really annoying to face for certain killers who have extremely telegraphed attacks like Hillbilly, Huntress, or Trickster as a couple examples. Sometimes Dead Hard just completely stomps on those killers and the only thing they can do is sigh in disappointment. In terms of complaints though, that's about it. It requires a lot of skill to use most of the time, killers can predict it and play around it if they know you have it, and it creates a lot of back and forth between the two roles, and has both the condition of being injured and having been hooked. In terms of exhaustion perks, I think Dead Hard is the most interesting and fun to use. It does a great job at giving the survivors a more interesting option when it comes to chases, other than just to run a little bit faster at times. I'd consider it pretty peak. So if you guys watched my top 10 favorite killer perks, you know I had Thwack in this spot. Well, I figured it would be appropriate and on theme to make my second choice for Survivor to be in a similar category. So we have Scene Partner. I love this stupid ass perk. When you're in the killer's terror radius and look in their direction, you scream and see the aura of the killer for 6 seconds, with the chance to continue screaming over and over again, revealing the killer's aura for an additional 2 seconds. This perk is so fucking stupid and I love it for that reason. Hearing someone screaming over and over again across the map or being the one screaming will never not be funny to me. There's nothing goofier than hearing Steve's weird scream like 5 times in a row. Some people complain about it being annoying and not funny. Have you no whimsy, no joy in that hollow husk of a soul? It's absolutely hilarious and no one will convince me otherwise. Running this perk on Steve should be an instant death sentence and I'm all here for it. With how serious some people take this game, I'm glad we have a perk that exists mostly to be silly, as all Nick Cage perks kind of are. I love it and have no problem saying that it's my second favorite Survivor perk in the entire game. Kindred takes the spot for my favorite Survivor perk in the entire game, and I'm sure that a few of you are surprised, but can you really blame me? When you're hooked by the killer, all other survivors can see the aura of not only the killer that's within 16 meters of the hook, but also the auras of their fellow teammates. On the flip side, when one of your survivor teammates is on the hook, you can see the auras of the other survivors as well as the killer, who again needs to be within 16 meters. This alone fixes my biggest problem that solo queue has by giving your teammates the information they need. They no longer have to wonder if someone is going for the save, they can physically see them. They no longer need to worry about whether or not the killer is camping, they can see the aura if the killer is nearby. They no longer have to take the time to get off the generator they're working on only to see that another survivor is coming for the save, they can watch it happen from a safe distance. All of this applies to you too, giving you all the information you need as to whether or not a save is going to happen, and if you need to be the person to do it. Kindred, I think, is a perfect example of just how much more tolerable a solo queue game could be if we were given just a little bit more information. Yes, the Survivor HUD that was added a while ago makes this perk a bit worse because, solo queue got better, but you'd still be surprised just how often it still comes in handy. While the Survivor HUD is insanely helpful, it still leaves a lot in the air. You might think a survivor is going for the save, only to find out they're hiding because the killer is nearby, or maybe they're being chased without being in a chase. It works very well, and it's rare that you don't get at least a little bit of use out of it. It's a perk that hasn't needed a change in 6 years, which I think really speaks for its consistent usefulness. It's my favorite Survivor perk in the entire game. Enough said. If you haven't used this perk, I'd highly recommend taking it into some matches. It's pretty goated. So that's about it. Those are my favorite Survivor perks. What do you guys think? I was really debating about some of these slots. I think I came to a decent ranking for each of them though. There were a few perks that got close, but just didn't make the cut. I could probably list 5 other perks that could have made it onto here, but I had to narrow it down quite a bit. Trust me, I'm just as disappointed as you are that fucking Pebble isn't on here. Pebble is hilarious. It would be like 11th. If I had to make it a bit longer. I'm sure you can tell a lot about how I play Survivor based on these perk choices, huh? Anyway, what perks would you guys put into a top 10? As always, I'm very curious what you guys think. Do you prefer healing perks, anti-tunnel perks, exhaustion perks? What perks do you pick when you want to play Survivor? Which playstyle do you choose? Let me know. But that's it for me, gamers. Have a great day.